on the price of coffee. That sounds a strange subject to be talking about, but it features, or some similar item features, in a well-known account of how organizations work by Parkinson, one of Parkinson's laws. And this one is basically that the length of a discussion in a committee is in inverse proportion or ratio to the importance of the subject. And as I recall, his example is a committee is discussing matters on an agenda, and one of the early ones is the price of coffee. Shall we put it up? Shall we remain the same? And the committee learnedly discusses the pros and cons and roundabout and so on for minute after minute after hour after hour. And lower down on the agenda, there is an item saying, shall we construct a new building for £200 million? And after exhausting themselves on the price of coffee, the chairman says, and now what about this £200 million? And everyone either is so exhausted or there isn't time, and it's just too large for them to think about. So it's waved through, nodded through. So it's quite a good strategy of someone who is a chairman and drawing up an agenda to put some subject which is of passionate interest but of minor importance, and then leave some very big decision to be decided on the nod at the end. Now, I'd always liked this because I'd seen it in practice many times in academic life and committees I've been involved with. But recently, recent events, which I can't go into, gave me a dramatic insight into two other features of this. What Parkinson suggests, as I remember, is that you spend all this time on the price of coffee because everyone is equally qualified to speak about the price of coffee. They all drink coffee and they all have strong views on it. And it's a small enough subject for normal humans' brains to get themselves wrapped around. Whereas spending £200 million and looking at the very detailed plans and really getting to grips with something large is much, much more difficult. And I'm sure that's one of the explanations. What I realized from a recent experience is that the depth of emotion in relation to the price of coffee. This came up because at a meeting I was at recently, we were discussing some subject which was of importance in itself, no doubt, but compared to a later matter on the agenda, it was terribly, relatively unimportant. And yet when I suggested we moved on, that it was less important for us to spend most of the committee time on, I was severely rebuked by people who said, no, it's much more important than the later item. And probably they felt it was. I mean, it was something that affected their lives day in, day out, like the price of coffee, and the other might or might not happen or occur, and it was hypothetical. And therefore, the passion was with the price of coffee. And it's not just that we can grasp it, but it's of more interest directly to us than events far away and as yet unknown. That was one of the things that I learnt. And the second thing I learnt was that if you challenge that and suggest that perhaps you should move on, it really grates and people think you're being diminishing their interests and so on. So it's something you have to be rather careful about. And the third thing I realized is that, of course, it applies not just to committee meetings and relative importance of subjects like that, but also throughout our lives. All of us know that we can have long and earnest and sometimes acrimonious discussions about whether we should go for a walk from A to B or B to C, or what we should have for supper tonight, or whatever it is. And those are the things on which you can have very detailed discussions. When it comes to something which is really big, like shall we buy a new car, or what kind of car shall we buy, or shall we move house or buy a new house, often these are very big subjects, and certainly in my experience, you very often think, well, yes, let's do it, because you can't really calculate all the variables and compare things, and so you make a snap decision. So the big things, you often make snap decisions, and the small things you often go to a lot of trouble to work out what you think is best.